I'm Heidi Larson. I'm a professor of anthropology. I'm not a clinician, uh, but I have worked very closely with the clinical epidemiological community. I'm based at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, but also here in Belgium with Antwerp and KU Leuven. Antwerp, the University of Antwerp, is our Europe regional base for the Vaccine Confidence Project. I founded the Vaccine Confidence Project 12 years ago as I saw a growing wave of questioning and anxiety, concerns, refusals in the public globally. In my previous role leading UNICEF's global immunization strategy, this is a global phenomenon, not uniquely owned by any country. And we've been for 12 years, let's see, seem to have, there we go. In 2015, we did to start and launch the Confidence Project. The idea was to get some metrics around people's issues, confidence, concerns around vaccines. Why was this happening? Where was it happening? How is it changing over time and place? This is just to give you some context for where I'm coming from for my few comments this morning, or this afternoon, sorry. We developed a vaccine confidence index. It has 4 domains: perceptions of the importance of vaccines, perceptions of their safety, their effectiveness, and their compatibility with religious beliefs. Overall, the world is generally valuing the importance of vaccines, but when it came to concerns about safety and efficacy, the numbers dropped, and that depended on where you lived. In general, the biggest lever of acceptance of vaccines is perceptions of their importance. If you don't think they're important, you're not going to care about the safety and efficacy because you don't think that they're important. So that's a baseline. As you can see on the left side, Europe, actually, we found, and coming from the US, I've lived in Europe for 12, 13 years now, but I had thought the US would be more red than it was. It's undoubtedly changed since COVID. But there was quite a bit of skepticism across Europe, with France being the most skeptical in the world, with over 40% of the population not agreeing with the statement vaccines are safe. Now, 3 years later, in 2018, we just published this study a couple years ago, mapping global trends, because what I think is particularly important and something to remember, particularly in the context of mandates, is that people's willingness to take vaccines, their confidence is highly volatile. And in the context of COVID has become even more volatile. Do not think a study you did 2 years ago will be relevant today. You may see certain communities that tend to be more skeptical, but in general, we've seen an absolute growing volatility of people's changing opinions about vaccines, specific ones and vaccines more generally. As you can see, in 2018, things got a bit better, but what was very concerning to me is it seems quite a diaspora of negative French language media. As you can see, Africa on the left in 2015 is largely blue, which is the more positive sentiments, and red is the most negative. You can see that Francophone Africa has become more skeptical in those 3 years, and even Canada, and largely from Quebec, that got a little bit better, but we did see a pocket in Quebec. This isn't subnational, but my big concern was in the diaspora of negative skepticism in through French language media. Um, that's just to put things in context. Shifting to the theme of the session, which is about mandates and the importance of them, the usefulness of them, the value. I think it's very much depending on the timing, the perceived need, and how time limited they are. There's a big difference between introducing a mandate that's for school-aged children going to needing a vaccine to go to school, as the mandates that were introduced in 2018, 2019, just after the major measles outbreaks. Both Italy and France increased the number of required vaccines to go to school. That's a very different kind of mandate. To participate in school, you need a vaccine than the kind of mandate we're talking about in the context of COVID, which is more population-wide. And given the fact that this is in the context of an emergency, an extenuated emergency, this is different, because this is not something that to do a mandate in the context of COVID is not sustainable. It is in, I think, certain times, certain peaks of emergencies where you can get cooperation, or at least enough cooperation with the public. There's a lot of debates about vaccines, as you all know well, and you've had, this is the last, I understand, of 4 sessions, so you've heard various perspectives. The reality is, as much as there are protests always, as much as there's resistance, as much as people will sometimes quit their job if they have to face a mandate, at the end of the day, that mandates do work if you only look at the number of vaccines being given. In the case of this was related to some vaccine mandates in Germany, Canada, France, and Italy. The line here is when a mandate was introduced, and as you can see, the vaccine uptake does go up. It does taper over time, and that's one of the things I want to talk about. The trend in the protests and the resistance to mandates, and not just vaccine mandates, which have been embedded in a broader rhetoric across all the protests that we're seeing. And this is it's a big concern I have moving forward to vaccines more generally, is that the whole freedom mantra has really taken over. It has moved the critics of vaccines have moved away from some of the specifics. I mean, there are some specifics, but it makes it a much more kind of untouchable restriction. You can't argue with someone for wanting their freedom. The question is freedom for who? And that's always going to be an issue. We've done a number of studies, and I have a number of colleagues who have been examining this issue to try to get some specific evidence. There's a very good recent study by Jeremy Ward and colleagues that I work with closely in France. And they did and I encourage people to have a look at it. The French Health Pass holds lessons for mandatory COVID vaccination. Basically, the conclusion was this is about the pass, but it implies having had a vaccine, that it encouraged vaccination of many who are hesitant or reluctant, but it has not reduced hesitancy itself. So at the end of the day, particularly in the context of COVID, where it affects where you can go and what you can do, sometimes people will take it just because they're much more motivated to go to the cafe, go to the concert, go to the whatever gathering. But it makes them more resistant moving forward because it hasn't changed their opinion. They're doing it for very practical, immediate reasons. We also did a, let's see, something's with my, there we go. In 2021, my team in the UK, we did a large-scale survey with over 17,000 adults. And what we found that was that there's a spectrum of beliefs and willingness in vaccine. You've got your pro people who will take it without question. There are fewer and fewer of those, but at least are more likely to take the vaccine, some with a little questions, but they'll take it. And then there's a group that are resistant. And then in the middle, which is the largest part of the spectrum, are what we would call the hesitant. Half of them, or I don't know, about half, depends on where you live, but on one end you have hesitant and leaning to yes, and the other end you have hesitant and leaning to no. What we found in our UK study, and this is consistent with a number of studies we've done in different parts of the world, if you put a mandate on a group of people, the ones who are pro-vaccine or leaning to be take a vaccine, that mandate is likely to push them, nudge them to get the vaccine. But what we see in the group in the hesitancy spectrum that is less willing, more hesitant, and leaning to not take a vaccine, it will absolutely harden their views to say, they will say, well, I was thinking about it, I was a little bit open, but now if you're going to put a mandate on, I will absolutely not take that vaccine. It becomes more an issue of resistance to the mandate than an issue about the vaccine itself. What's concerning is that some of these groups are in communities or groups that we have a longer term issue with vaccine acceptance. And the concern is with a mandate that we harden views that coming out of COVID, we're going to have a challenge for vaccine confidence and acceptance more broadly. And if there's one message or one point that I have is we absolutely need to take a long-term view on the implications of any mandate, not just how are we going to get more people vaccinated with COVID vaccine to get us to the other side? Because what we do now is going to have significant, I would say, implications of where we land on the other side in terms of the trust relationship with the public and how it has a knock-on effect on vaccine acceptance more broadly. Flu, childhood vaccine, any in the spectrum. Because the thing about COVID is that it's about everybody. So the challenge to us in the vaccine world, and we've seen an explosive increase in criticism, anxiety, and questioning of vaccines, because vaccines has the discussion around vaccine has gone into circles and communities and age groups that barely talked about vaccines before COVID. So with it has brought some positiveness and more appreciation of the value of vaccines on the one hand. On the other hand, we have bigger challenges ahead in terms of critique. As I was mentioned with the same study, you see that the vaccines, basically where the health pass is announced and going up, even though people were taking more vaccines, there was resent. There was anger, resent. They did it, but it didn't. It changed their mood about it. They get the vaccine, but it's not without a mood swing, and that it doesn't go away easily. They did an excellent disaggregation of We in the vaccine hesitancy field, and these categories of complacency, confidence, and convenience. I was on the WHO SAGE working group on vaccine hesitancy in 2011 to 2013. We had been asked to characterize vaccine hesitancy, and we found that the three key domains of hesitancy are complacency, don't feel like I need it, common in the flu vaccine, confidence, and that's trust, and convenience. And in the context of COVID, complacency, a mandate can actually be effective in getting the complacent ones. But what the concern is that sometimes it has limited effect in some of exactly the communities that we want to reach. Confidence can for the unconvinced, maybe make them more opposed. And that domain is the one I'm particularly concerned about, is the knock-on effect on public trust. Convenience is an absolutely important thing. And if there's another second message aside from the longer term impacts, is that mandates cannot be seen as being out there alone as the fix it. Absolutely needs to be embedded in a lot of other interventions. And I have to say, there has been some fantastic local work that I've become aware of in Belgium, in local communities, trying to bring mobile vans closer to people. These are, I think, what's most important right now is building on where there have been local successful efforts, and work harder on that, because that's going to be incredibly valuable. That will be capital for confidence moving forward about vaccines more broadly. This is another, we've tried to investigate this question of what is, from the trust perspective, how can we get numbers around it? How much does it matter? And in a 2021 study, I did an analysis with a colleague. This is with a global study in 32 countries. We had about 33,000 participants in these surveys. And we are asking about a number of different questions about willingness to take a COVID vaccine, along with vaccines more broadly. When we did the analysis against the classic demographic breakdown, sex, age, gender, employment status, income, health, stress level, and government handling of vaccines, we found, of all the correlations, the thing that really affected willingness the most was a perception of how well or not the government was handling the restrictions and the policies and the relationship with the public. We have, it's absolutely, it's not a subtle difference, it's quite significant. It's just to make the point on how much the public's perception of how they're being treated by government, how they're being respected, because a mandate by implication is top down. And for those who feel undervalued, who feel their dignity is at stake, that becomes a challenge. As I said, on the other hand, we know that they can be effective, they can work in actually increasing, but it's how they're couched, what else goes with that, how they're delivered. This was another study. This was it was a multi-country study, an analysis with some colleagues in Australia, Katie Atwell, who's done some really important work on values of vaccine. Again, this was before COVID, but still the point is there, because Australia went through a lot of decisions around vaccine mandates themselves. The importance of embedding it in other efforts to build public trust. And they make quite clear too that otherwise they risk being repealed and actually causing harm rather than help. Today, actually, we published with my colleague Pierre Van Dam and colleagues out of our Vaccine Confidence project at the University of Antwerp, a commentary on a new challenge for addressing vaccine hesitancy in Europe. And really, we came very much to the same conclusion through our own specific research, as well as our regular reviews of what other people are studying and finding among our colleagues globally. And really, the use of top-down approaches have done little when it comes to the specific concerns raised by communities, specific communities. So what's going to be really important, if there were a decision to do a mandate, that it's not without a lot of local support, people being ready in the communities that we know are more hesitant, or in the areas which we know that are there to help people along with it, to make sure the access is there, because it can also cause even more frustration if there's a mandate and people weren't getting the vaccine because they just had a challenging time getting it. So there needs to be the support to make that easier, more possible, more acceptable, especially if there's a mandate. So hand in hand with other interventions, highly locally targeted. My last slide, we have been doing since the 2015 study biannual monitoring of vaccine confidence across Europe with the Commission, with the European Commission. And every year we look back at change every other year we look back at changes. The good news is that a number of countries in Europe have increased, and you can see Belgium between 2018 and 2020 actually had a really important and remarkable increase in confidence around vaccines. And that's something to cherish. That's something to build on. You don't want to you want to preserve that and build on that. So how, if there are any mandates, how they're delivered, how they're couched, how they respect individuals and keep that trust, because it's all going in the right direction, and we just want to make sure it keeps going that way. That's it. Oh, and this was, sorry, just one of the things we did see in the 2020 study, and we are about to roll out one for 2022. So we will see the specific impact of COVID on broader confidence, and the headlines we hope to have by April. But one thing we did see, by the way, that in early 2020, before there was a COVID vaccine, there was a 17% increase in public perceptions of the importance and willingness to take the flu vaccine. So people do value vaccines. They wanted to get a vaccine, and at the time, only flu vaccines were the most relevant for respiratory, and people wanted it. So we have a good base to work with, and we just need to keep that positive spirit. And I think that it's not an easy question, and I'm happy to answer any questions to the extent I can.
Thank you,
And
Mrs.
I should apologize for not, my French and Dutch are not, I think I could present more clearly in English, and thank you for bearing with me. Okay, thanks very much. Let me just, from the start, in terms of conflict of interest, I don't think I mean, in terms of conflict with my husband, we have minds of our own. And while we discuss things, I have been working in this field for 20 plus years, and I don't see any conflict there. We're quite, there are things we don't agree on and things we agree on, like many. But I believe you also mentioned sponsorship and Gates and And with pharmacy, my research group does get some funding from pharmacy. We also from a lot of public sector, well, not a lot, but from various public sector funding. But we absolutely do not allow any kind of product promotion. We don't use names. We also, it's all on basically issues around public acceptance and willingness, and we are not beholden to any single industry. So just to clarify that. In terms of the question that just came up now, that was Barbara's question. The You raised an important point about the 90%, because actually the economist graph that I showed you was at a point where the uptake was low. And I think that would be one of the key questions I was put on the floor is, is this actually at this point a time when a mandate is needed? I mean, increase in uptake, yes, but to put it on a population wide relative to the success you already have, that's something certainly to take into consideration. The one I showed you was at a stage where it was low, so it does boost. Um, um, the one thing that on the polio question, and I've had a few people ask me outside of this forum, people don't seem to have a problem with the polio mandate. What's the issue with COVID? Well, the issue with COVID is that it's new. It's new, it's changing every day. The evidence is uncertain or evolving, I should say. The vaccines are brand new, quicker than any vaccines in the history of vaccines. There's a lot of hyper uncertainty, a lot of changes. And I think to appreciate that polio has been with us since the etchings on the wall in ancient Egypt, and people understand polio. They've been through it, even contemporary people. And we're also, it's the only current eradication effort in the world, and we're very close, but we're still not there yet, but we're very close. And I think it's a very familiar. And there's one thing we've learned a lot in risk science is the difference between familiarity, voluntariness versus unfamiliarity, and coercion. These are key issues. And the more things can be voluntary, the more they can be familiar, the more likely you'll get cooperation. So I think the biggest difference really is the nature of COVID and the uncertainty and the newness, both the virus and the vaccines. I think one theme that came across pretty much everybody's question is what's the alternative? How can trust be built? How can we mitigate the risk of knocking down public trust moving forward? I think at this stage, given how well Belgium has done there's still pockets, but is really to do more of what you're, in a sense, already doing in a very focused way, looking at where the issues are, trying to either see, is it a convenience issue, access issue? Is it confidence? Is it complacency? I just don't need it. Why do kids have to have it? Why, it's an older people are more vulnerable. To try to get around those issues. And the more that effort is made, and the more the outreach can be relevant to the questions of the public, because one of the problems where we lose publics is when people, public health authorities by nature are putting out information that they think is important for the public. And there's nothing wrong with that for a while. And that'll get you 60, 70, maybe even 80%. But then there's all these other questions that are not being responded to. I hear a number, I have a lot of dialogues with a number of social media platforms, getting on another question that was raised. And they've, Twitter, Facebook, a number of them say, go to the WHO, CDC, NHS, Belgian Health Authority. And people come to me and they say, well, thanks very much, but I've been there and they don't have what I need. That's why I keep going down the rabbit hole. So the more we can get these feedback that is relevant to people, and I am working with a couple colleagues here in Belgium on this chatbot approach, which is trying to make things more relevant. So the more we can do that, not just online, because online is important, but in locality. Some of the best examples I've seen around the world have been hyper local engagement. Barbershops in some of the Black communities in the US. There was the highest increase in vaccine willingness I've seen in the world is actually in the Black community in the US. And that was a concerted effort by Black doctors who went to their communities and went and worked locally and put a huge amount of effort in. It was called the Black Coalition Against COVID. And they went in there and they hung out with people and they talked to them. And they found that actually where people really hang out is the hairdressers and the barbershops or certain cafes. And they went where the people were. They went where the questions were. In another setting, it was grandmothers. In East London, it was Bangladeshi restaurant owners who, the Bangladeshi community had some of the worst mortality, the lowest vaccine uptake. And it was the restaurant owners who went out there, starting getting their vaccines, doing selfies of themselves, saying, help get our business back, but help get our community back. In cities where people live in small spaces, extended families gather in restaurants. They have a very important social function. So for them to come out there, it's about getting the economy back. It's about bringing us together again. It's about our ethnic identity surviving in this place. So I think there's different ways to do it. But it's a time also for creativity. It's a time to not just think about COVID. People have so many other concerns right now. They're worn thin, exhausted, on edge. We have to think about any effort we do about how are you doing? What else do you need right now? If people feel like they care about, you care about them, and not just getting, as they say, jabs in arms. They're so sick of hearing about jabs in arms or vaccines, or in the US, they say shots. But, we know how important it is. But let's put it in at the end of in polio, when we reach this last mile, one of the biggest things we learned globally was listen to the felt needs of communities. When they feel like you actually care about their survival as a community, um, they'll put the vaccine in there. But if all you do is keep coming to them for their polio vaccine when their kids are dying of dirty water, or their network is not getting whatever else they need. Obviously, this is not Christmas, but just in terms of some basic needs, that's really important. And just the gesture of listening, community listening, local neighborhood listening, and it sends a signal that this isn't just about the government trying to surveillance, to impose things. We want to get to the other side of this together. It's not perfect, but I think there's no way we're going to get 100%. I think not to, I believe in dreams. I wouldn't spend this much time in this field if I didn't kind of keep some hope. But we're not going to get 100%, but we can get a lot more and keep them engaged and keep that trust capital going and build on it. I think it's a huge opportunity. COVID will be remembered. People will be referring about life before COVID, life after COVID. And what are they going to remember about COVID? Did they come to my community and actually ask me how I was doing? I'll remember that. That makes me feel good about my either local government or a municipality or whatever it is. That's I think the best we can do. And I'm sorry if it sounds fluffy, but it's very tangible. It's very real. I would be more than happy to sit with anyone and go through some of the case studies that we've identified. Um, on the social media front, Finland, in my mind, has, I mean, I've really been looking around a lot. They have quite a good resilience uh, initiative going, and that starts in the schools about critical thinking. And it's really quite a fascinating approach that also we've done a 30-year analysis on Finland. They have been the absolutely most stable and confident vaccine support. And there's a relationship there. With Portugal, frankly, they brought the military in, but it was okay because there's a strong trust relationship with the government. And when you've got that capital, you can go far. And we're going to have something else coming down the pipeline, and we may have a couple things happening at the same time. A natural disaster and a pandemic. Well, pandemic's natural, I guess, but let's say a flood, which you're familiar with, happening at the same time, and we need cooperation. I think it's been the biggest place we've missed in all of our COVID preparedness has been societal preparedness. Everybody and all the tomes of commission reports I've been paying attention to over the last few years before COVID: supply chain, human resources, business resilience, all that stuff. And I couldn't find anything that looked at societal preparedness. I think we have a lot of work to do there, and it's what I'm committing. The focus of my work and my group moving forward is on that. But I'm really sorry I have to open another meeting because it's a topic I care about a lot. And just to assure you, I'm happy to continue the conversation where it's helpful.